Ever feel like you're missing time? Like hours have vanished and you have no idea where they went?
Oh, yeah.
And then imagine that feeling coupled with the conviction that you encountered something truly inexplicable.
I can't even imagine.
Well, tonight we're diving into one of the most famous alleged alien abduction cases in history, the story of Barney and Betty Hill.
Oh, right.
I'm sure most of you have at least heard the basics.
Yeah.
But tonight we're going deeper than ever before. We've got excerpts from the Wikipedia article on the Barney and Betty Hill incident.
Okay.
So buckle up.
What's so fascinating about this case is that it goes, way beyond a spooky campfire tale.
Right.
It really captured the public's imagination.
Yeah.
And it shaped how we think about alien abductions even today.
So it's 1961.
Okay.
And we're in Portsmouth, New Hampshire with Barney and Betty Hill.
Right.
They were an interracial couple, which was really unusual for the time.
Yeah.
Barney was a postal worker and he was active in the NAACP. And Betty was a social worker, so both of them were involved in social justice work, which already indicates that they were grounded, observant individuals.
Definitely, yeah. And that makes their claims even more intriguing, right?
Yeah.
Because these weren't, people who were known for flights of fancy.
Right.
Who are seeking the spotlight.
So they were driving back from a vacation in Canada when things took a turn for the bizarre. It was September 19th, 1961.
Okay.
Around 10:30 p.m.
All right.
They were driving through the White Mountains of New Hampshire, and Betty spotted a bright light in the sky.
Okay.
It was moving really erratically, not like any plane she'd ever seen. Now, Barney was initially pretty skeptical.
Okay.
He thought it was just a plane.
Of course.
Yeah, but as they stopped to get a better look, a sense of unease kind of started to creep in.
Yeah.
This plane began descending towards their car.
Oh.
Getting bigger and brighter.
Oh, no.
Yeah, definitely wasn't behaving like a normal aircraft. Wait, so they stopped to get a closer look?
Yeah.
I think it'd be hitting the gas and getting out of there. So they described the craft as larger than the Old Man of the Mountain, and we're talking about a natural rock formation, not, some tiny drone.
Right.
It was rotating, totally silent.
Yeah.
And it hovered close to their car. So this wasn't just some vague blob in the sky.
No. It was something much, much more defined.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets really interesting, okay? Barney claimed that he could see humanoid figures through the windows of the craft.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
He described seeing 8 to 11 figures wearing these, glossy black uniforms and caps. He even said he got the feeling that they were, somehow not human.
Whoa. Okay, I'm getting chills. I can only imagine how terrifying that must have been for them.
I know.
What happened next?
Well, the next thing they remember is driving down the road miles away from where they'd stopped.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
They had this sense of disorientation, like they'd lost track of time. And, not just a few minutes.
Right.
We're talking hours were unaccounted for.
That's crazy.
And this missing time is like a classic hallmark of these alleged abduction cases. It's like a chunk of their memory was just erased.
But there were clues, right?
Yeah.
Weren't there physical things they found that pointed to something strange happening?
Exactly. They discovered some physical evidence on their car and belongings.
Okay.
Like a torn binocular strap, scraped shoes, a torn dress.
Oh, wow.
Shiny circles on the car trunk.
What?
Even their compass started going haywire.
So they knew something had happened, even if they couldn't remember it. What did they do?
Well, they reported all of this right away. First to the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena.
Hold on, what's that?
That's NICAP.
Okay.
It was a civilian UFO research group, really popular in the 50s and 60s.
Oh, okay.
They investigated UFO sightings and tried to bring some scientific rigor to the whole phenomenon.
Okay.
So the Hills went to NICAP, and then they also reported it to the Air Force.
Wow.
But nobody had answers.
Of course not.
And they were still missing hours of time from that night.
Right. So this is where it starts to feel like a sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
So what did they do to fill in those missing pieces?
Well, they decided to seek help from a psychiatrist,
Okay.
a guy named Dr. Benjamin Simon.
Okay.
He specialized in hypnosis.
Okay.
So they were hoping to recover those lost memories and finally, understand what happened that night.
I mean, think about it. You're missing time. You found these strange marks on your car. I'd want answers too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I bet those hypnosis sessions unlock some pretty wild memories.
Yeah.
So what did they recall?
Well, under hypnosis, things got even more mind-boggling.
Okay.
So Barney recounted being forced off the road, encountering the beings face to face. He described them as having large, mesmerizing eyes.
So like the big-eyed gray aliens we see in movies?
Yeah.
But were they already, like, part of pop culture back then?
Not really. I mean, that image became popular much later.
Okay.
But what Barney described does sound, familiar to the gray stereotype.
Yeah.
But it's worth noting, though, that science fiction shows back then were already kind of playing with different alien concepts,
Right, like shows like The Outer Limits were really pushing boundaries.
Exactly.
But let's get back to the hypnosis.
Okay.
What did Betty remember?
So Betty's hypnotic recollection was largely consistent with these, really vivid recurring dreams she'd been having
Okay.
about the encounter.
Okay.
She described being taken aboard the craft
Oh, wow.
and undergoing some sort of examination. Now, it's important to note that while the specific details of the abduction, they differed slightly between Barney and Betty's accounts, the overall experience remained remarkably consistent.
So even though they were hypnotized separately, their stories basically matched up.
Yeah.
That's pretty compelling.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing not everyone was convinced?
Well, you're right. Interestingly enough, their hypnotist, Dr. Simon, didn't actually buy into the whole alien abduction theory.
Really?
Yeah. He concluded that it was more of, a psychological aberration, not an actual abduction.
Interesting.
He thought maybe their shared anxieties and the stress of being an interracial couple in that era might have contributed to these, shared imagined experiences.
So maybe it was all in their heads.
It's possible.
But what about all that physical evidence?
That's the thing with his case. It's full of twists and turns.
Yeah.
And there's one more piece of the puzzle that's really hard to dismiss.
Oh.
It comes from Betty's hypnosis sessions.
Okay.
She described being shown a star map by the beings.
A star map, like a map of where they came from.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's where it starts to get really sci-fi.
I know, right?
If you were in their shoes, hearing all this under hypnosis, would you believe it, or would you think your mind was playing tricks on you?
That's a good question. It's really hard to say.
It is, and what happened next with that star map is a whole other layer of this story. So we are going to dive into that star map mystery when we come back after the break.
Okay, so we're back, and I am dying to know more about this star map.
Oh, yeah.
It's already sounding like something out of, Star Trek or something.
You're right.
So this is really where the case takes a wild turn.
Yeah.
Because remember, this was 1961, long before, detailed star maps were available to the public.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So the idea that Betty could have just made up this detailed map from her imagination, that's pretty far-fetched, right?
Very far-fetched.
Right. She couldn't just have Googled alien star charts.
Right.
So how did this map become linked to the Zeta Reticuli star system?
Okay, so in 1968, an amateur astronomer named Marjorie Fish,
Okay.
she read John Fuller's book, The Interrupted Journey, which had all the details of the Hills story.
Right.
And Fish was really intrigued by this star map and decided to see if she could, decipher it. So she basically became a cosmic detective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and her process was incredibly meticulous.
Okay.
She spent years creating this three-dimensional model of nearby sun-like stars.
Wow.
Using thread and beads to represent their positions based on the distances that were published in star catalogs.
Okay.
So she wanted to see if any configuration of stars matched what Betty drew.
So she was basically trying to, recreate the view from different points in space to see if anything lined up with what Betty drew.
Exactly.
But how do astronomers even figure out those distances between stars in the first place?
Well, it's a bit complicated, but essentially they use a method called parallax.
Okay.
So imagine holding your finger out in front of you
Okay.
and closing one eye, then the other.
Yeah.
Your finger appears to shift position against the background.
Yeah, it's like a little optical.
Exactly. That's parallax.
Cool.
Astronomers use a similar principle, but on a cosmic scale.
So they observe a star from two different points in Earth's orbit, 6 months apart.
Okay.
And by measuring the tiny schist in the star's apparent position against the background of more distant stars, they can calculate its distance from us.
Using a lot of math.
Using trigonometry, yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So Fish was using these really carefully measured distances to create her 3D star map.
Yeah.
And she actually found a match.
So after analyzing thousands of vantage points, Fish concluded that the map most closely resembled the view from the Zeta Reticuli star system.
Whoa.
Which is a binary star system located about 39 light years from Earth.
Okay, so are we saying that the Hill's Parf might have actually been abducted by beings from Zeta Reticuli?
Oh.
This is blowing my mind.
Yeah, I know. It's pretty amazing. Fish's findings were definitely compelling.
Yeah.
And they sparked a lot of debate in the scientific community.
Right.
Some astronomers, like Terence Dickinson, were very skeptical. They argued that Fish had too much freedom to, adjust her model to fit the map.
Right.
And that other star systems might provide, an equally good match.
So it wasn't like a perfect one-to-one match?
Right. It's more like finding a close resemblance.
Okay.
And there's always room for interpretation.
Yeah.
But other researchers, like a statistician named David Saunders, he argued that the odds of a match like that occurring by chance were incredibly low.
Right.
So it's all a matter of how you weigh the evidence
right.
and what assumptions you're making.
I can see how that would get controversial.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's like trying to solve a puzzle with some pieces missing.
Yeah.
Didn't Carl Sagan have something to say about this star map?
Yes.
I vaguely remember reading something that he wrote about it.
You're right. Carl Sagan, the famous astronomer, science communicator, he weighed in on the debate too.
Of course he did.
And he was generally pretty skeptical of UFO claims. He suggested that the map was probably just a random alignment of points, not a real star map.
Okay.
He pointed out that, the human brain is really good at finding patterns even where they don't exist.
Right.
Especially when we're dealing with something as emotionally charged as, potential alien encounter.
Right. It's like seeing faces in clouds or animals in random ink blots.
Exactly.
Our brains just try to make sense of things.
Yeah.
But this star map theory was further challenged in the 1990s, right?
Yes.
Something about new data that kind of changed the game.
Exactly. So the European Hipparcos satellite mission, which was launched in 1989, that provided much more accurate measurements of star distances than we'd ever had before.
So it was like having a much clearer picture of the universe.
Yes, exactly. Like a much higher resolution image. It was a huge leap forward in astrometry, which is the science of measuring the positions and distances of stars.
Okay.
And when researchers kind of re-examined Fish's interpretation using the Hipparcos data, it turned out that some of the stars that she had included in her model were actually much farther away than we initially thought.
Okay.
So this essentially threw her conclusions into question because distance is no longer matched up neatly with Betty's map.
Right, because if the stars are in different places than you thought, then the whole picture changes.
Exactly.
But does that mean that the star map is just like a dead end?
Oh.
Is it just a coincidence, or was it Betty's mind trying to make sense of something that she just couldn't explain?
Well, the Zeta Reticuli connection might not hold up to, really close scrutiny.
Okay.
But the fact that Betty drew this map under hypnosis years before detailed star maps were readily available, that remains a compelling detail.
It's like there's this one piece of the puzzle that doesn't quite fit, but you can't just ignore it.
Exactly, and that's what keeps this case so fascinating.
Right.
Because even with all the scientific analysis and skepticism, there's still aspects of it that we can't fully explain.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we don't have all the answers.
Right.
And there's still so much to learn about the universe and our place in it.
This is reminding me of all those arguments about whether the moon landing was faked.
Yeah.
People look at photos and they interpret the details and, depending on their worldview, they draw wildly different conclusions.
Exactly.
I guess that's the same with this star map, right?
Totally.
You see what you want to see.
Yeah. You've hit on a really crucial point.
Yeah.
Perception is a really tricky thing.
Yeah.
We all bring our own biases and experiences to the table, and that shapes how we interpret information.
Totally.
And it's especially true when we're dealing with something as, unknown and potentially paradigm shifting as alien contact.
Right. So it's a good reminder to stay open-minded, but also critical of the information that we encounter.
Yes.
Don't just accept things at face value, but also don't dismiss everything outright.
Exactly.
There's a balance to be found.
Yeah, for sure. And even if the Zeta Reticuli connection, isn't as strong as we once thought, it doesn't negate the entire Barney and Betty Hill experience.
Right.
We still have the missing time.
Right.
The physical evidence.
Yeah.
And they're really consistent accounts under hypnosis.
Yeah.
So there are many layers to this case. And the star map is just one piece of the puzzle.
So it's like we've been talking about all these different pieces of evidence and theories in isolation, but how does it all fit together? What's the big picture here? What can we learn from the Barney and Betty Hill incident all these years later?
That's the big question.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
You know, from that initial sighting and missing time to the hypnotic recollections and that controversial star map. The Barney and Betty Hill case is just this tangled web of mystery and intrigue.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up here, I guess, what can we take away from all of this?
I think, their story really highlights how much we still don't know.
Yeah.
About the universe,
yeah,
about ourselves.
Yeah.
It's just this reminder that there are still these mysteries out there that challenge our understanding of, what reality even is.
Right.
And push the boundaries of, what we think is even possible.
It makes you think about, how much our own beliefs and interpretations can even be shaped by, external factors, like the stress that the Hills were under, or even the pop culture of the time.
Well, for sure.
We mentioned The Outer Limits earlier, but I'm kind of curious, how much did that show and other science fiction from that era really influence how we view aliens today?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
It's hard to say for sure, but the influence is definitely there.
Right.
Some researchers even argue that Barney's description of the aliens, with those large wraparound eyes, might have been subconsciously influenced by the Outer Limits episode, The Bolero Shield, which aired just a few days before his first hypnosis session.
So those iconic gray aliens that we see everywhere, could they partly be a product of 1960s television?
It's definitely a possibility.
Wow.
Yeah, and there are other Outer Limits episodes from that time.
Okay. Like
The Invisibles and The Children of Spider County that have even more parallels to the Hills story.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, like themes of alien examinations, social ostracism.
Wow.
Even a scene where the protagonist's car is stopped by an alien.
Huh.
Very much like what Barney described.
Wow. That makes you wonder how much of what we believe we experience is actually shaped by the stories we consume.
Right.
Especially when we're dealing with the unknown. It really blurs the lines between fiction and reality.
It totally does. I mean, it raises those really fascinating questions about the power of suggestion, the malleability of memory, and the role of the media in shaping our perceptions.
And it makes me even more curious about how the Hills' story was even received back then.
Yeah.
Their case became this media sensation.
Yeah.
After The Interrupted Journey was published in 1966, right?
A huge sensation, yeah.
So the book brought their story to the forefront and helped solidify the image of the gray alien in popular culture.
For sure.
Even if that image was already kind of brewing in the collective unconscious.
Right.
But it attracted a lot of skepticism, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. We haven't talked much about those skeptical viewpoints.
Yeah.
So what were some of the main arguments against the Hills story?
Well, one of the most compelling counter-arguments came from a guy named Jim McDonald.
Okay.
Who knew the area where the alleged abduction took place really, really well.
Okay.
And he suggested that the Hills might have actually misidentified a beacon on Cannon Mountain as the UFO.
Oh, okay.
He even pointed out that from their perspective on the road, the beacon would have appeared and disappeared.
Right.
At the exact moments the Hills described the UFO doing the same thing.
So just a case of mistaken identity. It's like when people think they see Bigfoot and it turns out to be a bear.
Exactly.
Yeah. But what about all the other evidence, like the missing time, the physical damage to their car, the hypnotic recollections?
Right.
How do skeptics explain all of that?
Well, they argue that even those details could have, really mundane explanations.
Right.
For example, the damage to the Hills car.
Right.
Could have been caused by, road debris or a really minor accident.
Okay.
That they might not have fully registered because they were in that, fatigued state.
Right, because they were driving late at night after a long vacation.
Exactly.
We all know how fuzzy your thinking can get when you're exhausted.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And fatigue can really play tricks on your perception and memory.
Yeah.
In fact, Robert Schieffer, who's another UFO expert, called the Hills poster children for what you shouldn't drive when you're exhausted.
Wow.
Yeah. So he believed that their exhaustion, combined with the stress of being an interracial couple at that time, could easily lead to misinterpretations or even hallucinations.
And the missing time. Could that be explained by, like, their brains just filling in the gaps in their memory, especially under hypnosis?
Yeah, that's what some psychologists believe.
Right.
Hypnosis is a powerful tool, but it can also be really unreliable.
Right.
It's totally possible for memories to be, like, distorted or even created under hypnosis, especially when you're dealing with something as emotionally charged as this alleged alien encounter.
It's like when you try to remember a dream, and the more you think about it, like, the more details you kind of add, even if they weren't really there.
Exactly, yeah.
But even with all the skepticism, I'm guessing the Hills story had a pretty lasting impact.
Oh, huge impact.
Didn't they even make a movie about it?
Yeah, you're right. Their experience was dramatized in a 1975 television movie called The UFO Incident, starring James Earl Jones as Barney and Estelle Parsons as Betty.
Wow.
Yeah, and the case just continues to be debated and analyzed today.
Of course.
Inspiring tons of books, documentaries, even fictional accounts.
It's amazing how a single event, whether real or imagined, can resonate for decades and just continue to spark our imaginations. It speaks to our, like, deep-seated fascination with the unknown.
Yeah.
And that possibility that we're not alone in the universe.
Absolutely. And that's what makes the Barney and Betty Hill incident such a rich and compelling case study. It's not about, finding a definitive answer.
Right.
Or proving or disproving their story. It's really about exploring the bigger questions.
Right.
About, memory, perception, belief, and the limits of our understanding.
So it's not just about aliens. It's really about the human experience.
Exactly.
What does it even mean to encounter something that we just can't explain? How do we make sense of the unexplainable?
Right.
Yeah.
And their story reminds us that even in our, really technologically advanced world, there are still mysteries out there that defy easy answers. It just encourages us to stay curious. Keep asking questions and be open to the possibility that there's more to the universe than we currently understand.
It's about embracing that sense of wonder and acknowledging that there are still things out there that we don't understand. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the mystery itself is part of what makes life so fascinating.
I think you're right. The Barney and Betty Hill incident might not have all the answers.
Right.
But it definitely brings up a lot of really thought-provoking questions.
And that's what this deep dive was all about. We hope you enjoyed this exploration of this really captivating case. Now, we would love to hear your thoughts. What resonated with you the most? What questions are you still thinking about?
Yeah, we would love to keep this conversation going. And until next time, keep looking up, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.